Imagine this. It's the year 2026. President Trump takes the stage at the Davos Economic Forum and gives a speech that doesn't just make waves, it causes a tsunami across the international community. It was chaotic, it was confrontational, and for some, it laid out a very clear blueprint for a brand new, and maybe very unstable, global dynamic. So today, we're going to take a look at what that blueprint actually looks like.
So the whole analysis of that speech really boils down to this one central question. Is this America First policy slowly turning into something else, something we could call a world disorder? Now, to really understand what's at stake here, we first have to be clear on what that term even means. You see, a world disorder isn't just about chaos for the sake of chaos. No, it's a very deliberate move away from the way things have been done since the end of World War II. You know, alliances, mutual agreements. Instead, it's a system where raw power, threats, and just making demands become the main tools of diplomacy. Let's dig into 3 key examples from that Davos speech that really show this idea in action.
All right, first up is something that seemed to come completely out of left field. Trump's sudden, non-negotiable demand for control over Greenland. And let's be clear, this wasn't some friendly proposal. It was delivered as an ultimatum.
And this really lays out the whole playbook. First, you get the blunt demand. The justification? Oh, it's all about U.S. national security, and Denmark is just too weak to handle it. Then comes the muscle, the threat of crippling economic tariffs. And the result? Well, it wasn't a clean win for anyone. It was this tense standoff that ended with a very vague NATO-brokered framework, which then gave Trump the room to lift the tariff threat. This one move really set the tone for everything else.
Now, this new way of doing things wasn't just reserved for strategic territories. It was also aimed squarely at one of America's oldest, closest allies, Canada. And what unfolded wasn't some quiet disagreement behind closed doors. Oh no, it was a very public and very bitter dispute.
And this just perfectly illustrates the breakdown in relations. On one side, you've got the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, basically telling the rest of the world, hey, you can't count on the U.S. like you used to. And Trump's response? It's not a diplomatic counter, it's a personal attack, accusing Canada of getting freebies and saying they should be grateful. It sends a very clear signal the old rules of diplomacy are out the window.
The third big theme that came roaring out of that speech was a massive shift on energy and the climate. And this wasn't just a simple policy debate. This was a full-throated rejection of the global agreement on climate change and at the same time a new, aggressive focus on getting resources. He didn't just disagree with Europe's Green New Deal. He called it the greatest hoax in history, a scam. He was openly making fun of renewable energy, things like windmills, basically saying the whole green movement was just a trick by other countries to get an economic leg up on the United States. The language there is just incredibly dismissive.
And believe me, this wasn't just talk. This policy had immediate, very real consequences. Look at this number, 50 million. That's the number of barrels of oil the U.S. confirmed it had taken from Venezuela. And this was right after a military operation to remove Nicolas Maduro from power. It puts a very concrete, very stark number on this new resource-first agenda.
Okay, so you've got these ultimatums, these accusations, this intense pressure. For a while, allies didn't quite know how to react. But then, according to the analysis, something started to shift. For really the first time, European allies started to band together to form a unified response. They weren't just going to sit there and take it anymore.
The head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, she stepped up and made a very public promise. She said that any response from Europe to these kinds of threats would be unflinching and united. That was a direct message, making it clear that the old tactic of picking off countries one by one might not work anymore.
And Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, well, he summed up this new feeling with a metaphor that is pretty hard to forget. If we are not on the table together, he said, we are definitely on the menu. What he's saying is, look, if we don't band together and negotiate as equals, if we don't all have a seat at the table, then we're just going to get picked off one by one, served up to a stronger power.
So let's just connect all the dots here. With Greenland, you had a demand backed by a threat. With tariffs, you had a tool used to force a change in behavior. With the climate, a total rejection of what the rest of the world was doing. And with allies, accusations of being weak and ungrateful. The one thing that ties all of this together is a clear, unmistakable shift away from cooperation and towards coercion. And that really brings us to the bottom line of this whole analysis. The entire system of alliances and international rules, the very architecture that's defined Western security for more than 75 years, is being challenged, maybe even dismantled. That old foundation, built on cooperation, is being ripped out and replaced with something else, brute force coercion. And that suggests a future where nothing is predictable anymore, where international fights are settled not by talking, but by force, whether it's economic or something else.
Which leaves us with the final and frankly pretty unsettling question that the source material poses. By tearing down this old structure, is the world being led to some new kind of safety and strength? Or, as some analysts are beginning to fear, is this world disorder just paving the road to a much bigger, much more dangerous global conflict? That is the thought we'll leave you with today.